have to go back to the health and fitness part. You said you experimented a lot, you went through a lot of different approaches, and that's something that I always think about. Carnivore diet takes quite a big leap of faith to even try, with everything that we've been taught about health, nutrition, and fitness. And with so much information, books, different opinions out there, how did you come to the conclusion of what is best for you?
I did a lot of really bad, stupid diets in the past. Seventh grade, I remember I did this. I remember calling it a 3-3-3 plan, whereas I would eat 300 calories for breakfast, 300 calories for lunch, 300 calories for dinner. And I'd also run 3 miles a day. As you might be able to guess, I did lose a significant amount of weight doing that kind of diet. I don't recommend that diet. I've done every macronutrient combination you could think of. I mean, talking like fat only diet, not ketogenic. Like, let's just try and eat like pure fat. Let's do protein only diet. And then let's mix and match them. So I've done all these kinds of experiments. By the time I was in dental school, I thought I had figured it out. And so in dental school, I actually started a website. It was called Muscle Science. It was basically, here, this is the science of, how to build muscle, lose fat, etc. And I did fitness competitions just to kind of like, hey, I'm going to practice what I preach. But I was lacking a lot of like the health knowledge, to marry those two things. So that's a little bit of background on these experiments.
And with your years of experience, what is the biggest takeaways and lessons that you can give us when it comes to gaining muscle, but also losing fat?
One of the big takeaways here is there's numerous different approaches that someone can use to do this, to build muscle, to lose fat, to have a good physique. I mean, you'll see like, I see on the internet, you got vegan bodybuilders and you look at the results. You're like, hey, you got pretty good results, right? And you can see the total flip side. Hey, this guy's only eating meat. He's got good results. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that was one of the biggest lessons, like eye-opening things. It seems so obvious now, but maybe 7 years ago where I'm like, health and fitness aren't necessarily the same thing. Mm-hmm. Like you can have a great body composition and not be super healthy. And, I was a personal example of that. I use my dad as an example a lot because he's in his mid 60s. He's on Medicare, and it's a good thing because he's had every health condition. For example, he's my height, 5'11". He's 165 pounds. He likes to golf like every day. So he's in the sun, he's getting exercises. He goes to the gym. He doesn't even really have a sweet tooth, but he basically can't eat without like taking a pill because of his stomach. He's on a number of medications from statins. He's had his gallbladder removed. He's had kidney stones. He's been in like the ER like 3 times in the last couple of years for kidney stones. I mean, and he had a CAC scan recently, which was not a good result. So, I mean, he's had lots of like health things that it's like, whoa, on the outside, you look at him, healthy man, exercise, doing a lot of things right. But there's a disconnect between, like having that kind of fitness, health on that end and like actually being healthy internally. To answer your question, sorry to ramble on there a little bit, but when it comes to building muscle, I think the simple takeaway is this: you do need adequate protein. Without an adequate protein, you're not going to optimally build muscle, and you need an adequate stimulus to grow the muscle. What also helps is to be in an energetic surplus, meaning, so if you're calorie restricting and trying to build muscle, it can be done, especially for like people that are like new, certain other circumstances, like people taking anabolic drugs, things like that. But in general, it's not a great way to put on muscle is restricting calories. Also, I was a cross country runner in high school. Long distance running and building muscle, not an optimal strategy. So from the muscle building aspects, those are kind of like some couple core tenets. A fat loss strategy, which is interesting because a lot of things with fat loss that are, it seemed polar opposite to muscle building. So fat loss, obviously, it helps to be in a caloric deficit. Now, there's a lot of things that go into creating this energy deficit. To me, the core tenet of fat loss is actually don't lose muscle. So what I see most commonly, people are like, hey, I'm going to eat less and I'm going to exercise more, kind of like what I did when I was a kid. And what happens is, yes, they lost weight, but they lost at least a proportionate amount of that weight from muscle. So it's like they were bigger, now they're smaller, but the body composition is like from a body fat percentage is very much the same, but now they just have a reduced metabolic rate. They're actually primed to like regain weight and be in a worse position than they started. So whenever I talk about fat loss, I'm always like, okay, number one rule of fat loss is don't lose muscle. And so I usually recommend higher protein as one of the ways to not lose muscle, as well as resistance training. So those are kind of the core tenets of fat loss are really kind of, hey, don't lose the muscle, make sure protein's high, doing resistance training, things like that.
I'm so glad you said that because I feel so strongly about not saying weight loss. It's not weight loss because at the end of the day, we still want to look fit, strong, feel strong, and be smaller. And especially for us ladies, a big part of my audience is females. And they will always ask me, but I don't want to look too buff. Although I still want to look toned, I want to look smaller. And I always say, please do not restrict calories, do not undereat, please don't starve yourself. I've done it myself. And it results in hair loss, mental fog, just so many things that I had to deal with for years after. I lost my period as well. So I feel like on the carnivore diet, the body kind of has a perfect source of energy, and yet it can still be very lean without working your ass off in the gym. So can you speak a little bit more on how important the food and the nutrition is?
The food and nutrition is super important for a number of reasons. And I think one of the things you highlight there is also very important is when people are trying to lose fat, a lot of times they're pulling the wrong lever. And what I mean by that is like exercise is a good example, like killing yourself in the gym, exercising, running miles and miles and miles, you're doing cardio all the time. And it's actually kind of similar to the caloric restriction is what happens. Your body actually gets more efficient at the exercise. So you'll burn less calories. And the body is a remarkable adaptation machine. And so, for example, you restrict your calories, the body's going to decrease basal metabolic rate because it's going to start trying being like, okay, I need to hold on to this. It feels like it's losing energy. I need to kind of save that. And I need to hold on. Same thing happens with exercise. And it's not to say like, you shouldn't exercise or like restricting calories or like, for example, fasting is like necessarily a bad thing, but it's just things to keep in mind that when these are done long-term into excessive amounts, they have the consequent, like the pendulum swings back. I like to think about minimums a lot. So for example, I think the protein leverage hypothesis is a very interesting hypothesis around protein, which is basically says if you are under eating protein, and we see this in animals, well, for example, an animal that is not getting enough protein, it will overeat the other food sources in an attempt to get adequate protein. So that's basically the protein leverage hypothesis. Someone's not eating enough protein, so they're going to eat, more carbs and more other stuff to try and get that protein out of something else. Adequate protein, I think, is always an important part of the equation. I think there's an equally kind of important thing with fat, especially fat-soluble vitamins. And so people that undereat fat, and one of the things I want to highlight here is like macronutrients aren't all created equally. Like plant sources of fat can be quite different than animal sources of fat. But if you're not getting, let's just say, adequate animal fat, good fat that we need, and you're not getting the fat-soluble vitamins that we need, these are basically building blocks to hormones, and it's going to allow you to get the body composition you want, allow you to have the basal metabolic rate to make eating to satiety and maintaining a body composition you want plausible. Because what a lot of people do is say they go on a diet and they start restricting calories, and let's say they're restricting calories to 1,000 calories a day, and so the body fat drops down. We can hypothetically just say they got to the place they wanted to get to. Well, eating 1,000 calories a day every day after that is not sustainable. So eventually you have to eat more, right? So they have to plan for that. And a lot of times, sometimes people think that I'm going to go on this diet, but then I can go back to eating XYZ and keep that fat loss off. But what makes up that food is going to make it possible to eat till you're satisfied and have a body composition you want. Starvation is not a long-term strategy. Like if you are starving yourself to try and get to your goal, that can be fine, but it's not a long-term strategy to maintaining that body composition.
Exactly. I always try to tell my audience, don't go for the quick fixes. Try to go the route where it's actually going to stay. The results will be permanent and effortless to maintain.